to get this webinar started. The very last webinar in 2015, and our topic for today is aligning your evidence and tagging it for your self-study. As you can see, this webinar is really designed for APPs that are having visits in the fall of 2016 and beyond. If you're an early adopter or a legacy visit, this won't be particularly applicable to your process right now, but you can certainly join in and learn, because eventually this too will affect you when you come up for your CAPE Standards accreditation under the full standards and the full procedures and processes. So here we go. Most of you are familiar with the process. You want to mute yourself? Well, let's see what's happening here. Definitely want to mute yourself. But remember to unmute if you want to talk. We've been having a little bit of difficulty with that. So if that is the case, please use the question and answer. It's called the Q&A box. You can enter a question in there. It is kind of like Twitter. It's limited to a certain number of characters, but I'm sure you can get your question. If not, continue it on a new question. Join into the chat. There is a chat room. Or you can raise your hand and I'll call on you. If you can unmute yourself and we can get that feature working. It's been problematic the last 2 times, but before that it was working just fine, so I'm not quite sure what's different in these cases. Teleconference is fully activated. Okay, so the recording of the webinar, as you know, is going to be posted on the CAPE website. I say by December 15th, but give people a little bit of holiday, a few days give or take there. And if you'd like a copy of the PowerPoint, CAPE does not post those, and so you're welcome to email me. You'll see that I have a new email address, lcvinc1@gmail.com. And I did not send these out in advance. I was working on them up until the last minute here. If some of you were on early, you may have seen me actually insert a few words into the title slide. So email me afterwards, and I'd be happy to send it along. What we're going to do today is to talk about aligning and tagging evidence. We want to talk about the purposes of standards alignment. I want to show you a couple of examples and hopefully open up discussion of where these sample assessments appear to be aligned and where they aren't. We want to discuss a little bit about how commingling of data can occur. And lastly, I don't have a slide on this because I've addressed it in every single one of the standards presentation, so I thought we'd just have an open conversation about responding to the holistic question. And we won't be talking specifically about technology. We'll just be talking about the question regarding each standard and how you should summarize your assessments to have that conversation with your CAPE reviewers. So here we go. We want as EPPs to align whatever evidence we present to CAPE to support our claims about what our candidates know and are able to do. And we want to align that evidence with CAPE standards, state standards, and other national standards, for INTASC, for example, or National Board for Professional Teaching Standards, or your state standards, whatever standards are appropriate to your programs. And why we want to do this, of course, is because it really does inform the evidence collection process. We're trying, and you'll have to excuse my voice, I've had a deadly cold for the last week or so, and it's kind of settled in my voice here. So alignment informs the evidence collection process, of course. When candidates have a particular assessment, it's great for them to know how they're performing in relation to the standards that are national standards or state standards, and are they at the appropriate performance levels that would be expected for them as candidates or as beginning teachers. And they can look at the assessments, and with alignment, they can discern what standards there are that they're attempting to meet. It provides evidence that candidates have met those standards because you have, through your rubrics or your scoring guides, you have levels of performance that indicate whether they're meeting the expectation or exceeding it or not meeting the expectation. However it is, you label the sort of performance levels. You're demonstrating to your reviewers that these performance criteria that you've established for your candidates aren't just picked out of thin air or made up on the fly, that they're actually based on standards that you are preparing your candidates to meet. And the assessments themselves provide direct evidence of candidate performance. You know, indirect evidence would be things like candidate responses on surveys, which aren't really direct evidence. They're perceptions about how well prepared they might be. So it's these assessments aligned with standards that are really providing the evidence for CAPE that your candidates are meeting their standards. So after that, little sermon, we'll go on to guidelines for alignment of assessments, and we've got 4 or 5 different categories of alignment that I want to share with you today. One of the first categories is the content congruence, and it's been a long time since we've really talked about rubrics and their alignment. I think I presented the rubric webinar back in April or earlier, and so it's been some time since we've really had a conversation like this, and I think it's important that we revisit that when you're building your rubrics or your scoring guides, you're looking for same or consistent categories of content, okay, between what the standards say and what your assessments say. So, for example, some of the content that appears in CAPE Standard 1 related to Component 1.1 are those 4 explicit categories related to NTASC that have to do with content, with instructional planning, with the learner and learning, and with professional responsibility. So those are 4 categories of content that you would hope would align well with some of your assessment items. Next, they ask that the content be congruent in terms of the range of knowledge that's required and that it's equivalent to the standard. So if the standard's talking about, you know, candidates know something, well, that's knowledge. If they talk about they demonstrate it, then we're talking more about skills. Does the standard talk about application or modeling or integration or analysis? Those are the range. You can think in terms of Bloom's taxonomy. What's the range of knowledge or expectation that is in your assessment that would be equivalent to the standard? And we'll look at an example in a minute. You want to see too, in terms of content alignment, is there similar emphasis that's given to different content topics, instructional activities and tasks within your assessments? And again, we'll go to a sample assessment in a minute and take a look at that to see if in fact there's a similar emphasis that's congruent with the component that they're addressing. And last of all, they're looking for assessment items balanced across standards. And so in Standard 1, for example, you have most of your content and pedagogical knowledge and skills. And across the various components, 1.1 through 1.5, there are a variety of assessment items that you can abstract from those standards or extract from those standards, including the 4 NTASC categories that I've already mentioned. In Component 1.2, it talks a lot about assessment and the candidate's use of assessment for student learning and for their own professional knowledge, so the use of assessment and research. Standard 5 talks about technology and the integration of technology. Component 1.4 talks about those content, college and career-ready standards. And so there's the range across that Standard 1 where assessment items can be balanced across those various components within that standard. So let's take a peek at an example here. And as you know, I characteristically embed question and feedback pauses throughout my presentation. So as soon as we finish with this particular example and a little bit of discussion, I'll pause and see if we have any questions. Okay, so we're going to look specifically here at Component 1.4, excuse me. And I've put the language of the component up at the top here and highlighted a couple of key terms here. The demonstration of demonstrate, okay, skills and commitment, and then all P-12 students, and college and career-ready standards. So here's an example of an assessment item that is aligned, purportedly, to CAPE Component 1.4, so CAPE Standard 1. And in this, you read the item on the assessment was that candidates incorporate into their lesson plans college and career readiness skills. So along the 4 categories across the top of developing, emerging, meets expectations, and exceeds expectation, you see an example of what the observers, whether those are college supervisors or teachers, cooperating or mentor teachers, that their lesson plan doesn't include any objectives specific to readiness. In the next one, that it includes at least 2 objectives specific to readiness, college and career readiness, but their learning experiences don't match the objectives. Their lesson plan includes at least 2 objectives, and the learning experiences are specific to college and career readiness. And the lesson plan includes at least 2 objectives, the learning experience are cross-disciplinary and specific to college and career readiness. So let me put this screen, make it a little smaller, move it off to the side, okay, because I want to bring up a rubric here, a content rubric. All right, and bring it up. That's an exact match of what's in the PowerPoint. Okay, now we'll go back to the PowerPoint and go down to the next slide. So I'm going to ask a question to you here. As you look at this particular item, let's just look at, let me slide it over and let's just look at developing, emerging, and meets the expectation. Do you see here an example where the content is congruent? And so here we go. I've made it fit a little better. Okay. So think about it for, well, you know what? It keeps getting covered up by your, by my chat boxes. Let me see if I can move this down and out of the way. Here we go, so we can keep seeing this. Okay, do you see congruence of content? And if you remember, the component talks about candidates' demonstration of skills and commitment for all P-12 students, access to career and college readiness. So here, what we're seeing is incorporating into a lesson plan college and career readiness skills. So do we see that that's included? Well, I think yes, we're seeing that they're including content and career readiness skills in terms of their planning. What is the range there? And remember, the range here was intended to be demonstration, not just knowledge of content and career readiness that you could incorporate into your lesson plans, but also are they demonstrating that they can teach to those? Can we see where they're affording all students access, where there's an intention to look for access of all students? And do we see skills as well as commitment here? That was part of what was intended by the component, skills and commitment. So let me pull up our attendees, see if anybody has their hand up and might be ready to talk a little bit to this, so I'm not talking to myself the whole time. Nope, nobody's going to help me out here, huh? Okay. That's fine. If you want to type a question or a thought into the Q&A or into the chat box, that would help. So if you were presenting this to CAPE, and I'll just keep on talking here until I see a question pop up or somebody's hand pop up. If you were presenting this to CAPE, I think that there might be some weaknesses here, okay, because including objectives doesn't necessarily show there's a demonstration here of skills. It might show commitment, okay, because you've got that. You're at least putting those college and career readiness standards in there, but we don't see the demonstration there. it does talk in emerging and meets expectation and exceeds expectation about the learning experiences being specific to college and career objectives. So there are the objectives in there. There are learning experiences that align with the objectives. But again, what we're not really seeing here are skills or the demonstration, and we don't really know to what degree there's been accommodation, to make sure that all students have access to this. So maybe those are additional items that you would want to present when you submit evidence to CAPE. It's not that this is necessarily a bad item, okay, although people who design rubrics might take issue with some of what's in here or how it's presented, because, one or two objectives, it becomes a frequency count rather than a skill set. Like, we don't know if those objectives are reasonable or age appropriate or whatever. So, there's room for improvement. But at least this is probably getting to commitment, because it is saying either candidates are not including these kinds of things in their lessons and aligning learning experiences with them. But it's not really getting at the demonstration or skills. Okay, so I'm going to kill my little slide here. There we go. And I'm going to drag this back up so we can all see it. Okay, so feedback and question. Feel like you would need lots more rubric rows. Yeah, that was a question in the chat room, and it's absolutely right that you would need a few more rubric rows just for that one item, that one component on skills and commitment and content and career-ready standards and affording all students access. So I think, what I'm thinking is that, of course, there would be something in any rubric, I think, that we have, or scoring guide that we have for candidates that would look at differentiation, and that you might apply that particular rubric item to, let's say, component 1.1 under instructional planning, okay, and under learning and learners, and then you could re-tag it, okay, when we get to tagging evidence, you can also tag it to 1.4. So what we want to do when we think about our assessments is to think about ways in which we can gather evidence that meets multiple standards in some way, okay, not within when we get to commingling of data, I don't mean to confuse, just packing a whole big bunch into a rubric item, but that there could be a number of different items that get submitted for a number of different components, and thereby would show multiple measures and would show the extent of what you're looking for. It's also true that maybe as part of a portfolio, you would deal with that commitment piece of, are they aligning their lessons, lesson objectives and their learning experiences with a career and college-ready standards. But then when it comes to observations in student teaching, you would look specifically for the demonstration of how they've integrated college and career-ready standards and demonstrated that they can teach to those standards. So there might be a way to capture through multiple measures, which you're probably doing anyways with teacher work sample or NTPA or portfolios, not just try to pack everything into that student teaching observation. Maybe there's a key assessment that they could have in an earlier course that would get at this kind of thing. Okay, I don't know if you think that's an adequate answer, but it's the best I can do right now. Or the idea is to have another piece of evidence to supplement the lesson plan. Yeah, bingo, that's where I ended up going. So, so great minds think alike. Whoever submitted that question, absolutely right. So either you have multiple assessment items or you have multiple pieces from different pieces of assessments. That works. Okay. Let me look real quick at our attendees, see if anybody has a hand up. And no, I don't. Okie dokie. So let me move on to the next example. We're going to talk about cognitive and skill demands. So another question or guideline for aligning assessments is to look at the cognitive and skill demands that are in the standards. And we touched on that a little bit when we talked about the range of knowledge, okay, and that there was demonstration and skills and commitment in that particular component. And this gets a little deeper at that, talking about the complexity of knowledge that's required and the cognitive demands that exist between, or alignment that should exist between the assessment and the standard, as well as the degree of challenge. And of course that the form of assessment is adapted to the objectives. Is it about applying, or is it about practicing? Is it about analyzing, or is it about reflecting? Okay, so we've got 3 new dimensions here, in addition to the content of the standard and the range, the other items we looked at in relation to content. Now we're looking at cognitive and skill demands. So we talked about it a little bit in the last example. Now I'm going to share a new example with you, and we'll talk through that. So here you see that this is focused on candidates identifying college and career readiness skills. Again, another assessment item that's aligned with CAPE 1.4. I think that in this, again, what you've got here is a frequency count, which doesn't really get at skill at all, okay? And they're identifying 1 or 2, identifying 3, identifying 5 or more. So I'm not quite sure what this does to further our candidates' effectiveness as beginning teachers. Nonetheless, here is another assessment item that's geared. Let's see if this one is really identifying, is really touching on aligning with the cognitive and skill demands. So what we've got are, do you see alignment of? And here we're looking for complexity, challenge, and the objectives of demonstration, skill, and commitment. So let me pull up my cognitive and skill rubric there and cover you guys up. Let's see if that'll work. Nope, not going to work. Okay. Going to pull this up a little higher and pull this one down a little lower. There we go. Okay. So in this one, are we seeing complexity? I don't think so. What we're seeing basically is identification of areas is knowledge, and a very low-level knowledge, really, of being able to identify college and career readiness skills. We're not seeing skill development to afford access. The challenge here, the challenge in this statement, in this component of 1.4, is really affording all students access. So the complexity is in the skills. The challenge, I believe, is in affording all students access and being able to show that candidates not only know what those college and career-ready standards are, or the 21st century skills, or the new generation science standard. They not only know those, but they can teach to those, and they can teach to those in a way that allows for multiple ways to both get at the content and display the learning, which is all about affording all students access. And last of all, the objectives in the standard are about demonstration and commitment. Okay, and so do we see demonstration here? I don't think so. And do we see commitment here? Not really. The earlier example, I think, was a better example of commitment because it asked that the candidates show these college and career-ready skills in their lesson plans and that they have learning experiences aligned with those objectives. And so I think that was a better example of showing their commitment. What we failed to see, however, was the demonstration. So let me see if we have any more questions or anyone with their hand up here. And I apologized earlier for my voice because I'm struggling with a cold, and guess what? It looks like I'm just about to lose it. Okay, I'm going to diminish this. Pull this up, make it a little bigger. There we go. And on to the next slide, which is a feedback and question pause. So one of the things that well, you know, I lost my train of thought. I was thinking that earlier when we were talking about the identification of those skills, and maybe we'll get to it in another example. Let me see if I can pull that one back. Okay, if we're looking for skills in affording all students access and demonstration and commitment, we talked about ways to have other assessment items or to integrate other assessments to demonstrate. Most of the time, CAPE is going to be looking for at least 2 measures for a particular component in the evidence. So if you can think of having at least 2, and if you have 3, all the better, because then you've really got triangulation. And when it comes to writing your holistic summary for the standard, you've really got 3 points of discussion that allows you to really have a richer analysis of the evidence that you put forward. Okay. We're going to move on here, and I think we're going to finish up early. It's 5:30, and let's see, we're on slide number 13, and we've got 22 to go, so we're pretty much most of the way there. So one of the concerns, or one of the cautions, not so much a concern but a caution, is about commingling data, is that an assessment can be aligned with the standard, but it may not provide specific evidence for the standard. Okay, so assessment may attempt to measure multiple components of a standard or different standards within one item. And this is where you get at that commingling issue, where when you have results, you know, that most of our candidates are performing at a certain level, you're not really sure which aspect of the assessment item it is that candidates are achieving or not achieving. So we'll go into an example here. And your assessment scoring guide may have multiple criteria within one item. And that can be a little bit confusing, because we're going to have an example here in a minute. Okay, but both of these are going to result in commingling of data, all right? Let's go on to this example. So again, we're looking at component 1.4, demonstrating skills and commitment that afford all P-12 students access to rigorous college and career-ready standards. So here we've got an assessment item that says it's providing evidence for component 1.1, 1.3, 1.4, and 1.5. And in this particular case, it's attempting to do a whole big bunch in there. And let's look at what it's saying. Within the developing category, we just show that candidates are using a single teaching strategy. Okay, so we are getting a demonstration here. We are getting at skill because we've got this using a strategy, okay? We've got a strategy that aligns with lesson plans and addresses college and career readiness. Again, we're getting into a bit of a frequency count when we say, well, they're using 1 or 2 teaching strategies that align with objectives, address college readiness, and are interactive. Then we've got into use a variety, okay, that align with lesson objectives, address the standards, and engage students. And here we've got variety of teaching strategies that align with lesson objectives, that address college and career readiness, and engage students in learning experiences across disciplines. So with this particular one, there's a lot going on in this particular assessment item, where it's attempting, I think, to get at this instructional planning and the learner and learning by getting at engaging students in learning experiences. But let's say, for example, we've got a student here, okay, who's at meeting expectations. What we don't know is if they're not particularly adept at engaging students, we don't know if that's the point that's being noticed here, okay? Here we've got interactivity, but here we've got engagement, and I really wonder about the differences between the two here and whether the data that's showing how many candidates, what percentage of candidates are meeting expectations, if we really know that addressing those college and career-ready standards to, that's fully applicable to that component if it's really showing that, or if it's showing more of their variety of the use of teaching strategies that's going on, or more about their engagement. So there's a little bit of cross problems here. I've got another question, and I'm so excited. I love questions. Let me go to our, okay. So let me address the question first. It says, where are the guidelines, content range, complexity, challenge, balance listed, or do we have to figure these out? No, the guidelines so far are in this PowerPoint. So I can send this PowerPoint to you. That's the point of this presentation, this webinar, is to talk about the alignment of assessments. It's also been presented by Stevie and Patty in an earlier CAPE conference. It's also, a lot of these points are brought out by Stevie when she has her quality assessment workshop, and when you look at the workshops on rubrics, etc. It's pretty much consistent with what you'll find in those various approaches. Okay, so somebody said, please send out the PowerPoint. Will the webinar recording be available later as well? Yes, the webinar recording will be available, and I tell you what, don't write to me and ask to have the PowerPoint. What I'll do is when this webinar is over, I'll have the CAPE tech staff send me the list of people who participated, and I'll send you the PowerPoint presentation and the survey on the same email. So just stay tuned and you'll get it in the next day or two. I can't stand the fact that there's a typo here, so I'm going to take care of it. Okay, there we go. So this particular guideline talks about multiple measures, and that's kind of the conversation we were just having about having 2 or more assessment items to submit for a particular component. So you want to evaluate your candidates using multiple types of assessment across multiple domains, blah, blah, blah. We all know this. But some of the ways that multiple assessments can be provided are in terms of who the assessment data is collected through. If you have your instructors in a course, if you have your supervisors, university or college supervisors, if there are classroom teachers, perhaps there's even a candidate self-assessment. All of these would be another way, another measure, okay, that it's from a different perspective. And so multiple measures could be submitted in terms of assessment items because you've got both your classroom mentors and your university supervisors looking at your candidate performance, but through their own lens. Candidates are asked to demonstrate their knowledge and practice in a variety of settings. So here, too, part of the CAPE standards, actually, let's focus on 2.3, 3.4, and 5.1. So standards 2, 3, and 5 ask you to demonstrate that throughout their programs you're assessing their developing skills. Okay, so that's the way in which candidates' demonstration of their knowledge and practice, their skills, can be demonstrated in a variety of settings. So, for example, it might be an observation or a lesson plan or an assessment that they submit to a class and then submit their instructional plans differentiated for student needs afterwards. So these are ways in which the variety of settings piece can come into play, and that there can be a variety of assessments used. Paper and pencil tests with scenarios of could be an example. Video analysis, essays, as well as your observations of field experience or student teaching. So these are multiple measures, can cut a lot of ways. not just lots of different assessments, but assessments of different, in a variety of settings and through a variety of assessors. Okay, another guideline for alignment is related to fairness. And I was interested in this particular facet of guidelines for assessments because I felt that it really got at this issue of fairness and freedom from bias. And that is one of the in component 5.2, I think you'll find some language, and in component 5.1 about assessment measures that are fair and unbiased. So here's sort of a CAPE perspective on that. And it's that faculty are looking at the fairness of their assessments on a continuing basis so that the assessments are really only conducted on the knowledge and skills that candidates have the opportunity to learn and practice. And I'm sure we can all remember in our own student days, undergrad days, and my gosh, that's a long time ago for me, but I still remember taking exams or being asked to respond to questions that I felt that, my gosh, did we even go over this in class? And then, you know, finding that, no, in fact, we didn't, but nonetheless, the question was asked. So make sure that what's in your assessments are stuff that your candidates are familiar with. You guys know this. Assessments use appropriate terminology, and certainly are going to avoid stereotyping, ethnocentrism, bias, okay? So we know to stay clear of terms like that. Assessments are accurate representations of performances, competencies, and dispositions included in a standard. And this is where your validity can be really important here, your content and establishing your content validity, because it really says that folks outside of, you know, your dean and assistant dean or your coordinator have looked at your assessments and say, yeah, you know, these are the right things to be looking for. And these are good representations of what beginning teachers need to be able to do and should be able to perform. So that gets at a repeat of that particular criteria validity, and that your assessments are yielding consistent results. And so consistency is all about your reliability. And so there's the inter-rater reliability that CAPE is particularly focused on right now. And you can get at that. So let's move on to the last piece about actionability. So on your assessments, you know, sometimes we can, and I too, as I present this, can get into a very sort of, okay, here's what CAPE thinks, here's what CAPE wants, here's what CAPE expects. But I often try to pull back from that and say, okay, what's the big picture here? What is CAPE trying to get at as it establishes these expectations and provides these guidelines to you? And what we can say is that it's looking at getting us better assessments, okay, and trying to encourage us to look more deeply at our assessments and the alignment of our assessments to standards that have been nationally recognized, nationally accepted, nationally developed. And that kind of alignment goes to say that in teacher preparation, we are preparing our candidates to do the things that nationally we have decided are important knowledge and skills to develop. CAPE is always also trying to get at the quality of those assessments, through the validity and reliability and fairness, and it's also trying to get at the use of our assessments. And so I remember from the old NCATE days and being an NCATE coordinator, and I'm not bashing NCATE here by any means, but perhaps bashing myself as a former and still recovering NCATE coordinator, that often we sort of gathered all this data together and presented it to our reviewers, and then the NCATE report got put on a shelf until, you know, about 5 years later when we started to gear up for the next NCATE visit. And so this is the point of this particular guideline, which is getting at actionability. Are we using these assessments in a way that informs the candidates. And so there's the importance of those assessment items and the importance of being able to tease out at the performance level what we need to be telling our candidates they need to be able to do to be better beginning teachers. So we want to be able to use our assessments for the candidates, but also once we aggregate data across courses or across programs, within programs and across programs, that we can look at particular assessment items and say, gosh, you know, compared to these other assessment items, our candidates seem to be a little more challenged by this particular aspect of their preparation programs. So what can we do? Is it the assessment that's off? Is it our instruction? You know, maybe you pull together a group of candidates who performed in differing ways on that particular thing and say, what's going on here? You guys tell us what's happening. So what we want to be able to do in aligning our evidence is to be able to use that evidence for our own purposes, and then we systematically analyze the data that comes from those assessments and present that to CAPE as part of our accreditation. So let me move on. Feedback and question pause, anybody? I'm hearing lots of click-ons and click-offs, but I'm not seeing too many questions. Wait. Oh, yes, there's a third question that appears, but it's not appearing on my... Yep, okay, we've got 3, and I answered all 3. Have another piece of evidence. Where are these guidelines? And please send out the PowerPoint. Okay. All right, we're good. Chat room, we're all good. Let me look at our attendees, see if anybody has a hand up, hand out. Okay, answer's no. So let's move forward. Let's move forward into tagging evidence. Okay, it says no more guesswork for reviewers. This is a real important piece. Shows alignment of the evidence to a specific standard or component, points the team directly to what they need to see, and as a consequence, it really strengthens your case. If you tag your evidence correctly, then what you're going to have here is not what we used to have in the past, which is people would submit the student teaching observation, and it would have a ton of items in there, and they'd tell us how their candidates performed overall. But it was very difficult. You know, your reviewers had to go through, you know, just tons and tons of stuff to try to figure out, well, what exact item is related here. So here's a sample data chart that I used when I presented on Standard 1. If you want to see a whole ton of data charts, you can go to my Standard 1 presentation or ask me for the PowerPoint. And here's what they've done here. They've tagged to CAPE 1.1, 1.1, 1.1. They've tagged to MCASC. They've said, okay, here's the mean for the EPP. So for all the students across all programs, okay, here's what the mean score was. The numbers don't exactly add up, so I'm not so sure about this chart, but nonetheless. So then it disaggregates by specialty area, so we can see how the elementary students are doing, how the early childhood candidates are doing. How about those candidates in physical education or music education or art education? Are all of them developing learning experience that are appropriate for the grade level and connected appropriately to the standards? So this is where you're directing in your evidence a direct tag to CAPE, to the INTASC. In this case, it's to the standard, but you can write in the INTASC category there instead. And if you have state standards, you can write that in as well. So there's no question about what the reviewers are looking at and what it's related to. Okay? So down here, for example, it's got participates in school-related professional development activities. Well, that's great. That relates to the INTASC category of professional responsibilities. Okay, so they've tagged it to 1.1. There may be other CAPE standards that you would, other CAPE components that you could tag this to as well. All right, so I have a question. Yay, so happy. Am I hearing correctly that it's best not to combine CAPE components in an assessment rubric, but rather to keep each component in a separate rubric? Yeah, I'm kind of afraid that that's what folks might have heard there. And I don't think that's the intention, because it would be appropriate if you, and I mentioned this earlier, had an assessment item about differentiating instruction to afford all students access, that you could tag that to 1.1 and the in-task category on instructional planning. And you could also tag that to component 1.4. Because that talks about affording all students access, okay? What I think I was trying to say was, if you tag it to too many standards, no, let me repeat that. If you tag it to too many components and you pack different elements of the components, not the aligned elements of the components, but completely different elements of completely different components, then you've got a little bit of data commingling going on, okay? It could show that your candidates can differentiate instruction, but maybe they're not integrating technology to engage all students in the learning experience, okay? So we're not quite sure, if you put multiple elements in there that are unrelated, okay, that it wouldn't result in some iffy data. So I think the best thing that I would suggest to people, if you have the time, is to submit your assessments to CAPE for that early instrument evaluation that they have. I call it the EIE. Let CAPE know that you've got some rubrics and scoring guides that you want to submit. If you send an email to Richard Rice, he'll set you up a shell for you to submit those assessments and get some early CAPE feedback before you submit your self-study. Get some early CAPE feedback on the quality of those assessments right off the bat, so that then when you go to write your self-study, you have an opportunity to say, okay, you know, here's what CAPE suggested on this particular rubric, and here's the changes that we made, here's how we use your advice, and here's the data that we've got from the newly revised assessment, okay? So I think that is an approach you might want to take to get some feedback. Commingling is a key consideration on what to combine. Yeah, I think it is. I think commingling might be a key consideration. You know, unfortunately, I have a different PowerPoint slide entirely that gets into these qualities of rubrics and some of the difficulties with rubrics and commingling of data and providing candidates feedback that might be helpful to you. So if you want to email me, I can send you some other further examples. Okay. Now, couldn't this example be tagged to other CAPE components too? And if so, do you have to show it on the chart? Yeah, you could tag this to other CAPE components, and yes, I would show it on the chart. So the item on the assessment is, can they develop learning experiences appropriate for the grade level and connected to the standards? So yeah, it seems like you could also tag that to CAPE component. It's saying connected appropriately to the standards. That's CAPE component 1.3, I believe. And developing learning experience appropriate for the subject and grade level is part of 1.1. Using discussion to promote higher level thinking through accountable talk and academic conversation. Part of this can get into those college and career ready standards, because frankly those standards talk about higher order thinking, okay, and proposing creative solutions. So yeah, I think you can tag these to multiple components. Just be careful that within the particular item you aren't looking for, you know, 2 or 3 different elements of multiple components, and that's what we were just talking about. All right, seems like I have another question, and I'm loving this. I love my questions. I love me some questions. Okay, let me check further down. Where are the guidelines? Okay, I answered all the questions so far. No, nothing more in the chat. And let me get over to my attendees and see if anybody has a hand up. Yay! There is a hand up. So, Darren, unmute yourself. Okay. And I will try to unmute you here. Okay. Can you do that? Can you unmute? I think I just did that.
Can you hear me?
I can. I can hear you. Can everybody hear Darren? Excellent.
All right. Well, I know our evidence tags are limited to 90, correct?
Not your evidence tags. Your pieces of evidence are limited to 90.
Oh, that's what I meant. Yeah, the pieces of evidence. So, like you mentioned, like the student teaching assessment, if and the reviewers don't like just to have the full-blown, all the data on there, correct, for one tag? It seems like I would quickly run out of 90 pieces if I'm supposed to trim that down.
Yeah. And
that would be one piece of evidence, and then another place I'm supposed to trim it down. It seems like I'm going to
run out.
I'm going to go over 90 pretty quickly.
I understand. So here's the trick to that.
Okay.
Is to cut and paste and put it in a PDF.
Okay.
And upload the PDF as a single assessment. So what you can as a single piece of evidence. So what you can include, for example, is you can include your data chart, and you can include the assessment instrument, and you can include your scoring guide, okay, and everything, because it's all in one single PDF and it only counts as one.
Okay.
Make sense?
I'll be working on that and see how it goes.
Okie doke. And it can hold as much as 20 megabytes.
Okay.
Okay, so it gives you quite a bit of room there.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, folks, any other questions? Let me see. That was a great question. Thank you, Darren, for raising your hand and speaking up. And I learned how to unmute. I'm so happy. All right. I'm going to move on. I don't think there's much further to go here. Yeah, that's right. Final feedback and question pause. All right. And engaged feedback is vital to CAPE. So I'm going to be sending out a survey on this webinar. I said that I would attach the PowerPoint to that, so you'll be getting it. I'm going to send the version of the PowerPoint that has the 2 corrected typos that I did while you watched. And I thank you for your participation here. It's actually 5:52, so we've got at least 8 more minutes, and I'm happy to hang out here and see if anybody has any further questions that come up. Feel free to ask them on the Q&A. And right now I'm going to go through and unmute everybody. If you have barking dogs in the background, we're going to hear them. Okay, so I'm going to go unmute everybody. And that means anybody can speak right up. Okay, anybody wanting to ask a question now? Speak. Talk to me.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
All righty. My question is what? Yes, Sherry. As we set up a shell, you said Richard somebody that we were supposed to ask to get a shell set up to submit our assessments. What was that last name?
I'm going to type it right onto the screen. Let me come up to because I have the ability to do that. Let me get in here, okay? It's Richard Rice, okay? So it's richard.rice@capenet.org. There you go.
Thank you. And then my next question is, what's the average turnaround time when we send in a rubric to get feedback on? About how long?
Okay, excellent question, and one for which I don't have a very accurate answer. Because CAPE is still working on training the reviewers. So I believe that staff is doing this. It would be a question to ask Richard because he'll have the best, most up-to-date knowledge. In normal terms, they were expecting that 3 months you would have answers.
Okay. Thank you.
Fully functional. But definitely ask Richard when you ask him to set up a show, because I know some folks have been waiting a long time.
That's what I needed to know. We don't want to wait any longer then. Thank you.
Okay. Tell him you need it stat. Okay, anybody else? Oh, I've got a couple people telling me to go rest my voice.
Yes.
Yeah. No. I got a couple other questions come up in the Q&A box. Let me see. But those are, nope, other questions I've all asked. Let me get to this one.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm hearing key consideration. Where in Ames do we place answers to the 5 questions below for all evidence pieces? I'm going to show you that live and in person, okay? So let me get off my PowerPoint. I'm going to go into Ames to show you this. Ames, there we go. It's on my fast version here. 2, 4, 9. Oh. There we go. That was a piece of panic. So the login ID to get into Cape University is 24319, and the password is CAPE, C-A-E-P. Okay, I'm waiting for the stuff on the side here. Here we go. Go into visit report. Okay, when you go into, if you have this already set up for your university, fine. If you don't, go into this Cape University. It's available to anybody. Again, the log 24319, and your password is CAPE, C-A-E-P. It'll open up to this right here. And what you're going to do is click on Visit Reports. When you get to Visit Reports, click on Self-Study Evidence. And this is where you upload, and you can see that lots of people have been uploading stuff in here just to play around, okay? Once you upload something and you tag it as being an EPP instrument, it's only when you're submitting an EPP instrument that you guys have created yourselves in-house do the 5 questions come up. And here they are. Okay, you can click under the under those EPP-wide assessments and just click on that little icon, and here come the 5 questions. During which part of the candidate's experience is the assessment used? Who uses it and how are folks trained? What's the intended use? I mean, what's the assessment supposed to measure? How trustworthiness was established, validity, and how is consistency established, reliability. So for any EPP instrument that you upload, these are the 5 questions that you will answer. So let me go back here to Cape Ames, okay? So remember, it's Visit Reports, Self-Study Evidence, and then when you click on that Self-Study Evidence chart, it's still working over here. There we go. This is the place. You can see that each one of these is blank because what it's telling you is that the questions have not been answered. Okay, so you can just click on this little square right here and the questions will pop up. There you go. I'm going to cancel my submission there, and I'm going to close this down. Do I want to close this? Yes. There we go. And we'll back on out. Okay. Any other questions? Yep. What is this item of evidence? How was the quality of the evidence determined or assured? Criteria for success. Yep. How was the evidence used? So you can see that the questions are slightly different from these 5. I think the reason is that these 5 were the 5 evidence questions for early adopters. But if you're hosting your visit in fall 2016 or beyond, you want to use those 5 questions that I just showed you that are inside Cape University on the Ames website, on the Ames website, okay? Those are the ones you want. 5 questions for EPP-wide are not the same as these 5. Do we answer these 5 or all 90? No. No. Again, we're confusing, and it's unfortunate, but early on, we needed to have some evidence questions for the early adopters for the CAPE standards, and so that's where those 5 questions that you listed in the Q&A came from. Those were the early adopter questions. Since then, CAPE, in coordination with the Accreditation Council and with the board, have revised and fine-tuned those questions. The questions that you're going to answer if you're hosting a visit from fall 2016 and beyond are the 5 questions that I just showed you in Ames. Okay? Good. One more question. Good. Okay. Nope. Not question. Good. Okay. Yeah, something in the chat. You guys are great. Oh, my goodness. Thank you so much, because I'm getting all these questions and chat things. If we were to send our rubric to CAPE for review and we got feedback but couldn't make changes to them, would CAPE reviewers know we sent our rubrics for review and didn't make those changes? That's a good question. Well, they'll know if you don't say you made any changes. I would think that you might want to say, when you're talking about the quality of your assessments, that, and you would talk specifically about the quality of your assessments in component 5.2, is that in that place you could say that you submitted the items to CAPE, and CAPE recommended a number of changes, but you've been unable to make those changes, and for the following reasons. And explain yourself. You can try not to share that and hide it. But then if some of those changes that they suggested were fundamental to the quality of your assessments, the reviewers are probably going to call out some of those same factors. So it might be helpful to address those up front and say, you know, in the time that we had, we were unable to make these changes to establish content validity or whatever, and explain what you're doing and what your plan is for making changes. Because you didn't really say in your question, Barb, if why you didn't make the changes. You said you couldn't make the changes. So maybe you ran out of time, or maybe your faculty simply dug in their heels and said, we're not changing anything. Then, you know, that would be a bit of a challenge to explain. Don't know what else to say about that. Okay. All right, let's go back to view our attendees, see if anybody's got their hand up. Nope. Okay, just got a few people left online, and in fact, it is 6:03. So unless there are any other questions, I am going to stop our webinar and thank you all for attending. Stop sharing my screen. Stop recording.